Do you even understand what you've done? His voice echoed through the conference room like thunder, and I stood there frozen, presentation file clutched in my trembling hands, my heart pounding so violently I thought everyone could hear it. I was just a junior assistant in this massive corporation, Charles Reed, 24 years old, someone who had never dared to dream big because life had taught me that dreams were luxuries people like me couldn't afford. But today, standing in this sterile room across from CEO Thomas Hale, I felt like I was suffocating in an invisible box, the air growing thinner with every second. His gaze bore into me, cold, sharp, merciless. He looked at me as though my very existence was an offense, as though I had committed some unforgivable crime simply by being here. Sir, I only entered the data that the marketing department provided to me. I tried to keep my voice steady, but every word came out shaking, betraying the terror coursing through my veins. Shut up. Just 2 words, but they carried such weight that my throat went completely dry, as if all moisture had been sucked from my body. I pressed my lips together hard and dropped my gaze to the floor, unable to meet those accusatory eyes any longer. Because of your incompetence, our biggest client meeting was canceled. Do you have any idea how much money this company just lost? Do you have even the slightest sense of responsibility? My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the file tighter to prevent it from slipping. Yes, I had gotten confused with some of the figures, but the mistake wasn't intentional. Never intentional. I had stayed up all night perfecting those presentations, double-checking every number until my eyes burned. But none of that mattered now. Standing before Thomas, no explanation would suffice. He didn't want to hear reasons or justification. He only wanted to unleash his fury, and I was the convenient target. All I could do was stand there and fight back the tears threatening to spill, determined not to break down in front of everyone. I could fire you right this instant, he continued, arms crossed over his chest, his face an emotionless mask devoid of any humanity. Do you know why I'm not? Only because your department head begged me to give you another chance. Otherwise, security would already be escorting you out of this building. My heart sank so deep, I felt like someone had placed a boulder on my chest. I had worked so hard to keep this job, arriving at 6 every morning, leaving at 10 every night, sacrificing weekends, ignoring my health, pushing myself beyond every limit. And now this man was treating me like I was disposable garbage, something that could be thrown away without a second thought whenever it became inconvenient. I stood there with my eyes downcast, humiliated and broken, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. But then, the door opened. An elegant woman entered the room, dressed in a soft white suit, a gentle smile gracing her features, yet her eyes held an unmistakable authority and power that commanded respect. I recognized her immediately. Marian Hale, Thomas's mother, a board member of the company. Everyone in this building knew where the real power resided, in this woman's hands. Thomas, she said, her voice calm but carrying a firmness that could not be ignored or dismissed. What exactly is happening here? Thomas immediately straightened his posture, his shoulders going rigid. Mom, this is an office matter. I'm handling it. An office matter? Marianne's eyes shifted to me and I saw genuine concern in them before she turned back to Thomas. I could hear your voice from the corridor outside. Do you honestly believe this is an appropriate way to speak to a junior employee? Is this the leadership your father taught you? Thomas fell silent, his jaw clenched tight. I could see a flicker of embarrassment cross his features. Marianne approached me slowly, gracefully like she was moving through water. Her expression softened, but I felt something strange happening. She was looking at me differently, not just as an employee but as someone who truly mattered, concerned, protective, almost motherly. Are you all right, dear? She asked me, and there was such genuine warmth in her voice that my throat constricted painfully. I nodded silently, unable to produce any sound. My emotions were swirling inside me like a violent storm I couldn't control. Marian turned back to Thomas, her tone shifting to something much stricter. Apologize. Right now, this instant. Visible shock registered on Thomas's face. His eyes widened in disbelief. Mom, you can't. I said apologize, Thomas. If you treated someone disrespectfully, then you need to make amends. It doesn't matter if he's junior, senior, an intern, or the janitor. Respect is everyone's fundamental right, not a privilege you grant selectively. A current of electricity seemed to run through my entire body. The CEO was going to apologize to me because his mother demanded it. Was this actually happening? Was I dreaming? Had I passed out from stress and this was some bizarre hallucination? Thomas looked at me reluctantly, and I could see multiple emotions warring in his eyes. Embarrassment certainly, frustration definitely, but also something else I couldn't quite identify or name. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire ready to snap. The air in the conference room felt heavy, oppressive, filled with unspoken tension. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, feel the sweat forming on my palms despite the air conditioning. Marian stood beside me like a shield, her presence both comforting and confusing. Why was she doing this? Why did she care about someone as insignificant as me? Thomas's chest rose and fell with a deep breath, his internal struggle visible in every line of his body. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. His jaw worked as if physically forcing words out was causing him pain. The mighty CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without blinking, was being brought low by his mother's simple command. I wanted to speak, to say something that would ease this unbearable tension, but my voice had completely abandoned me. My legs felt weak, threatening to give out at any moment. This entire situation felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life, someone important enough to warrant this kind of intervention. Marian's hand gently touched my shoulder, a gesture so maternal it nearly broke the dam holding back my emotions. "Take your time, Thomas," she said quietly, but firmly. "I'll wait as long as necessary." The power dynamics in the room had shifted completely. The man who had seemed like an untouchable tyrant moments ago now looked almost vulnerable, caught between his pride and his respect for his mother. And I stood between them, a pawn in a game I didn't understand, wondering how a simple data entry mistake had led to this impossible moment. Thomas stood before me, his posture rigid with tension, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white, shoulders drawn up defensively. His eyes remained fixed on me, but the anger that had burned there minutes ago had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked like embarrassment mixed with frustration directed inward rather than at me. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, each syllable seeming to physically pain him as it left his lips. "If I overreacted, if my behavior crossed professional boundaries, then I apologize for that," Marian observed with a satisfied expression, then turned to me with a smile that felt genuinely comforting and warm. "You should return to your desk now, Charles. And if you ever encounter any problems or difficulties, you can come directly to my office. Is that understood?" I managed a shaky thank you, my voice unsteady, and hurried out of the conference room as quickly as dignity would allow. But once I reached the corridor, my heart continued racing as if danger still lurked nearby. What had just transpired in there? Marian had protected me as if I were someone special to her, as if she actually cared about my well-being. But why would she? I was nobody in this massive company, just a small junior assistant whom nobody took seriously or even noticed most of the time. The remainder of the day proved torturous. Everyone in the office stared at me with strange expressions, whispering behind their hands whenever I passed. News had already spread throughout the entire floor that CEO Thomas Hale had personally apologized to me under pressure from his mother. Some people looked jealous, their eyes burning with resentment and hatred. Others appeared merely curious, hungry for gossip material to share during lunch breaks. The most uncomfortable moment came when I entered the break room to make coffee and two senior employees abruptly stopped their conversation. The instant they spotted me, their faces betraying their interrupted discussion about me. But what disturbed me most profoundly, what kept my mind churning all afternoon and would surely keep me awake all night, was that Thomas hadn't suddenly started ignoring me afterward. Previously, he never even glanced in my direction when I passed him in the corridors, as if I were invisible furniture. But now, something fundamental had shifted. When I stood alone in the break room facing the coffee machine, he appeared there as well. When I approached his office to submit a routine file, he summoned me inside, without any legitimate business reason, without any urgent task requiring immediate attention. "Charles," he said, standing near the enormous glass window that overlooked the city, hands casually tucked into his pockets, his expression thoughtful and distant. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating his profile. "Are you feeling better now? I mean, after what happened this morning?" The question caught me completely off guard, so unexpected and out of character for him that I remained silent for several seconds, my brain struggling to process what response would be appropriate. "Yes, sir. I'm perfectly fine. Please don't worry about it." He slowly turned toward me. Something different inhabited his eyes today, a softness almost like guilt, a vulnerability I had never witnessed before in all my time working here. I became excessively harsh. Perhaps my reaction was disproportionate to the situation, but you must understand the pressure that exists at this level, Charles. Clients making demands, board meetings scrutinizing every decision, investors watching every quarterly report, media analyzing our every move. There are constantly eyes judging your every action. I nodded with understanding, but internally I felt confused and surprised. This man who had publicly berated me and humiliated me just hours earlier was now attempting to justify his actions to me. Was this some psychological defense mechanism, or was something else happening here that I completely failed to comprehend? He seemed to be reading my expressions, studying my face carefully, because he cleared his throat awkwardly and continued. "Actually," he said with obvious hesitation, fidgeting with his tie in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically nervous, "Mom suggested that I should take you to dinner, to apologize formally and properly. If you would be comfortable with that arrangement." My pen nearly slipped from my fingers, and I fumbled to catch it clumsily. "Dinner? Sir, you want to take me to dinner?" "Yes. I mean, it would just be a professional courtesy dinner. Nothing unusual or inappropriate. If you're agreeable to the idea." His tone attempted casualness, practiced and businesslike, but the awkwardness remained plainly visible on his face, and he waited nervously for my reaction as if it actually mattered to him. My mind went completely blank for a full second. The CEO wanted to take me to dinner? Thomas Hale, the same man who had threatened to fire me this morning, who had made me feel like worthless garbage. Was this actually real? Or had I somehow slipped into a parallel universe where normal rules didn't apply? Or perhaps this was purely Marion's pressure forcing him into an obligation he resented. "Sir, yes, certainly, thank you for the invitation," I somehow stammered out, the words tumbling awkwardly from my mouth. He nodded with visible relief. "Excellent. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. I'll send you the address details." After leaving his office, I walked through the building in a daze, my thoughts spinning chaotically. Workers passed by me in the hallways, some offering sympathetic smiles, others shooting envious glares. I barely registered any of it. My mind kept replaying the bizarre events of the day. Thomas's explosive anger, Marion's unexpected intervention, the forced apology, and now this dinner invitation that made absolutely no logical sense. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my remaining tasks, but the words and numbers on my computer screen blurred together meaninglessly. My hands moved mechanically across the keyboard, typing without conscious thought. Every few minutes I would glance toward Thomas's office, visible through the glass walls that separated executive territory from the common work areas. Several times I caught him looking in my direction as well. When our eyes met, accidentally, he didn't look away immediately, as he normally would have. Instead, he held my gaze for a moment, just a brief second, before returning his attention to whatever document lay before him. Each time it happened, my heart would skip a beat and I would quickly look back at my own screen, face flushing with confusion. What was happening? Why did the most powerful man in this building suddenly seem interested in my existence? And why did Marion treat me with such peculiar kindness, as if I meant something to her personally rather than being just another anonymous employee among hundreds? As the workday finally drew to a close, and employees began filing out of the building, I gathered my belongings slowly, deliberately delaying my departure. I didn't want to risk encountering Thomas in the parking garage or elevator. Didn't want another awkward interaction today. My emotional capacity had been completely exhausted. Tomorrow evening, I would have dinner with my boss. The thought terrified and confused me in equal measure. That evening, I stood before the mirror in my small apartment, attempting to decide what to wear while anxiety twisted my stomach into knots. My wardrobe offered limited options: 2 formal shirts, 1 decent blazer I had purchased during a clearance sale, and a couple pairs of basic trousers. This was supposed to be just dinner, professional and casual. Yet my stomach churned with nervous butterflies, and my hands trembled as I tried buttoning my shirt. Any normal person would feel somewhat nervous. But this was Thomas Hale, the CEO, my boss, and his mother had probably pressured him into offering this apology dinner. This had to be mere formality, I tried convincing myself repeatedly. Marion must have forced his hand. Thomas probably didn't even want to do this. But when I arrived at the restaurant, a small, cozy Italian establishment downtown with soft amber lighting and an intimate atmosphere, and saw Thomas waiting in a casual blazer, crisp white shirt, no tie, looking unexpectedly relaxed, I realized this might be a different Thomas entirely. Not the intimidating CEO. Just a person. "Charles, you made it," he said, standing politely like a proper gentleman, and he pulled out my chair before I could reach for it myself. I smiled awkwardly, probably appearing as nervous as I felt, and sat down carefully. A waiter approached promptly with menus, took our orders efficiently, and then we found ourselves engulfed in uncomfortable silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on us from all sides. Thomas finally broke it, sipping wine before asking in an attempt at casual conversation, "So, do you enjoy living in this city? Have you adjusted well to urban life?" "Yes, sir. I've been here approximately 2 years now. Previously I lived in a much smaller town. There weren't many career opportunities there, so relocating became necessary," I answered honestly, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded with apparent genuine interest, actually listening. "What about your family? Do they support your career choices?" I paused awkwardly. This topic always made me uncomfortable, stirring up feelings I preferred to keep buried. "They live quite far away. Actually, sir, I'm mostly alone here in the city. No close friends or relatives nearby." My voice automatically dropped lower. Thomas looked at me then, truly looked at me. Not as an employer evaluating a subordinate's performance, but as one human being acknowledging another person's humanity, as if he was noticing for the first time that I possessed feelings, experienced struggles, wasn't merely a file-organizing machine existing only to serve company needs. "I feel alone sometimes too," he admitted softly, his tone carrying unexpected vulnerability. At this level of authority, isolation becomes inevitable, Charles. The higher you climb professionally, the more you realize how few people you can genuinely talk to without barriers. This confession felt so unexpected, so raw and unguarded, that I found myself staring directly into his eyes with surprise. Genuine vulnerability resided there, something I had never anticipated seeing: real emotions, real loneliness, an authentic human side hidden beneath the CEO persona. "Thomas," I began, but he smiled slightly. "Charles," he gently interrupted, leaning forward somewhat, "I believe I misjudged you initially. I evaluated you unfairly without taking time to understand who you actually are. You work incredibly hard and show dedication, and I never properly notice individuals as people. I only observe results and analyze numbers. That approach was fundamentally wrong." Hearing him say that created a warm, light sensation in my chest, as if invisible walls were slowly crumbling between us, as if some unexpected connection was forming where none had existed before. Our food arrived and conversation began flowing more naturally. Thomas shared details about his childhood growing up under strict expectations, constant pressure to excel, never being allowed to simply be a child. I opened up about my orphanage experiences and struggles. Gradually, our defensive barriers lowered. But then, just before dessert could arrive, his phone rang sharply. He glanced at the screen and I watched his entire expression transform instantly, becoming tense, deeply worried, guarded, almost frightened. "I need to leave right now," he announced, standing abruptly while hastily retrieving his wallet. "There's an emergency situation." I stood immediately as well, concern flooding through me. "Is something seriously wrong?" He hesitated while paying the bill quickly, then finally spoke, his voice strained with barely controlled panic. "Marion, she's been taken to the hospital. A cardiac issue apparently. I have to go immediately. Fear gripped my heart suddenly. Would you like me to come with you? If you don't want to face this alone. He looked at me with surprise, then nodded gratefully. Please. Yes. I would appreciate that, Charles. I rode in his car through the darkening city streets, and I could clearly observe his fear manifesting in his eyes. In his tense driving, in the way his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. He drove faster than safe, weaving through traffic with barely contained desperation. We arrived at the hospital and he practically ran toward the ICU wing, with me following closely behind. Doctors stood outside in a small cluster, their serious expressions revealing nothing reassuring. Mr. Hale, a senior physician, addressed him professionally. Your mother experienced a sudden cardiac episode approximately 1 hour ago. She's currently stable, but we must monitor her extremely closely for at least the next 48 hours. This was essentially a warning sign that cannot be ignored. Thomas released a deep breath of relief, though his entire body remained rigid with tension. He covered his face with both hands briefly. Struggling to compose himself, I stood nearby quietly, feeling utterly useless and completely out of place. Should I even be here? This was an intensely personal family crisis. I was merely an employee, practically a stranger. But then a nurse emerged from the ICU and spoke directly to us. She's awake and asking for you. Also, she specifically requested someone named Charles. Thomas and I exchanged confused glances. How did Marian even know my full name personally? Why would she specifically ask for me during a medical crisis? We entered the room quietly together. Marian lay in the hospital bed, various monitors connected to her body with wires and tubes, her face appearing exhausted but conscious and alert. When she saw me enter behind Thomas, she smiled weakly, but the smile seemed genuine and warm, as if my presence brought her some measure of comfort. Charles, you came, dear, she said slowly, her voice noticeably weak but carrying unmistakable affection. Thomas appeared surprised, and so was I. Why was she addressing me with such familiarity, such warmth? Why was she calling me dear as if I were someone important to her personally? Mom, please conserve your energy. Don't try to talk too much right now. You need complete rest, Thomas urged with genuine worry evident in his voice, gently holding her hand. But Marian extended her other trembling hand toward me in clear invitation. Come closer, Charles. Please come here. I approached hesitantly, confusion and nervousness making my movements stiff and uncertain. She grasped my hand with surprising strength for someone in her condition, and looked directly into my eyes with an intensity that made my breath catch. Her gaze held something profound, recognition mixed with desperate hope, as if she were searching for confirmation of something she already knew in her heart. You know, dear, you remind me so incredibly much of someone, she whispered, tears beginning to well up and spill down her pale cheeks. My younger son, the child who was taken from us so many years ago, stolen right out of our lives. My heart seemed to stop beating entirely. The room tilted slightly and I felt Thomas's hand on my arm steadying me. Taken? Stolen? What was she talking about? Thomas's face had gone completely white, as if all blood had drained away. Mom, please. This isn't the right time for this conversation. You need to conserve your strength. No, Thomas, Marian said firmly, though her voice remained weak and she struggled to speak. I must say this now while I still can. Charles, when I first saw you in that conference room, standing there so vulnerable and afraid, something inside me recognized you immediately. The same eyes, the same gentle smile, the same innocence my baby had. A strange trembling began in my core and spread outward through my limbs. Goosebumps erupted across my skin. I genuinely could not comprehend what was happening. Who had returned? What was this conversation actually about? Tears flowed freely down Marian's cheeks now, her emotions completely unrestrained. My younger son's name was Christian. Christian Reed Hale. He had eyes exactly like yours. That same shade, that same expression. When he smiled, truly smiled with happiness, his eyes would crinkle at the corners precisely the way yours do. Thomas's face had become utterly colorless. He suddenly gripped my hand tightly as if needing physical support and gently but firmly pulled me out into the corridor. leaving Marion in the care of the attending nurse who had quietly entered during our conversation. Thomas. All of this I began in confusion once we were alone. Charles, I need to ask you something. He interrupted, his voice shaking uncontrollably, his hands still gripping my arms almost desperately. Seriously, with complete honesty. What is your full legal name? What's your actual background before the orphanage? I answered, confused and increasingly frightened. Charles Reed. Just that. No middle name officially recorded anywhere. I came from the East Side orphanage when I was around 5 or 6 years old. I never received any proper records about my biological parents. There's no family history available to me whatsoever. His eyes widened impossibly, becoming almost wild with realization. He cupped my face with both hands and stared at me intensely, desperately, searchingly, as if attempting to memorize every single feature, every angle, every detail. Do you have any birthmarks, anything distinctive or unusual? Perhaps on your left shoulder? He asked almost frantically, words tumbling out rapidly. I responded slowly, confused and slightly scared by his intensity. Yes, actually, there is one. Near my left shoulder blade, a small birthmark. It's shaped somewhat like a star. Doctors told me it was quite unique. Why are you? Thomas suddenly pulled his shirt collar aside and revealed his left shoulder. An identical birthmark. Exactly the same location. The same star-like configuration. My hands began trembling uncontrollably. My legs felt weak and unreliable beneath me. Charles, Thomas said, his voice choking completely, tears forming and threatening to spill. I believe, perhaps you might be my younger brother. You might actually be Christian. The hospital corridor seemed to spin around me. Fluorescent lights blurred overhead. The steady beeping of machines from nearby rooms faded into distant noise. This couldn't be real. This was impossible. People didn't just discover their long-lost families after 20 years. This was the plot of a melodramatic movie, not actual reality. We need proof, I heard myself saying, though my voice sounded distant and strange to my own ears. This could just be an extraordinary coincidence. Birthmarks aren't that uncommon. Similar appearances happen. We can't just assume. You're absolutely right, Thomas agreed quickly, desperately wanting to believe but forcing himself to remain logical. We'll arrange a DNA test immediately, a proper professional one. We need to know the truth with certainty. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and began making calls right there in the hospital corridor. Arranging for a private laboratory, ensuring complete confidentiality, scheduling the sample collection for first thing tomorrow morning. His efficiency was remarkable even in the midst of emotional chaos. I leaned against the cold hospital wall, my mind racing through fragmented memories. The orphanage, being told I was found abandoned, the recurring nightmares I'd always dismissed as childhood trauma, that persistent feeling of not quite belonging anywhere, of searching for something I couldn't name. Could it possibly be true? Thomas finished his calls and turned back to me, his expression softer now, vulnerable in a way I'd never witnessed. Whatever the results show, Charles, I want you to know something. These past few days, getting to know you as a person rather than just an employee, it's meant something to me, regardless of biology or family connections. I nodded, unable to trust my voice to remain steady if I attempted speech. We returned to Marion's room, where she had drifted into a light sleep. Thomas sat beside her bed, holding her hand gently, his entire posture radiating protectiveness and love. I stood near the doorway, feeling like an intruder in this intimate family moment, yet unable to leave. A nurse came by to check Marion's vitals, smiling reassuringly. She's stabilized nicely. The next 48 hours are critical, but her signs are encouraging. Thomas nodded gratefully, never taking his eyes off his mother's peaceful face. I found myself studying them both. The shape of their faces, the line of their jaws, the way their hands looked similar. Was there resemblance between Thomas and me? Had people ever commented on it without us realizing? I tried to remember if anyone at the office had ever mentioned we looked somewhat similar, but my memory offered nothing useful. Hours passed in that strange liminal space of hospital time, where minutes stretched and compressed unpredictably. Thomas insisted I return home eventually, promising to call immediately if anything changed with Marian's condition. I reluctantly agreed, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had been sustaining me. The taxi ride back to my apartment felt surreal. City lights blurred past the windows, other people going about their normal evenings, completely unaware that my entire understanding of my identity had just been shattered and possibly reconstructed. At home, I stood under the shower for a long time, letting hot water cascade over me, trying to process everything. The birthmark on my shoulder, something I'd always viewed as just a random quirk of genetics, might actually be a link to a family I never knew I had. A family that had searched for me. A family that had never stopped loving a child they'd lost. I dried off and stood before the bathroom mirror, really looking at my reflection for perhaps the first time in years. Who was I? Charles Reed, orphan and junior assistant? Or Christian Reed Hale, lost son of a powerful family? Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow science would definitively tell me whether this impossible situation was actually real. But tonight, I could only lie awake in the darkness, my mind churning through 20 years of memories, wondering if everything I thought I knew about myself was about to change forever. The next 2 days existed in a strange fog of anxiety and surreal routine. I went to the office mechanically, my body performing familiar tasks while my mind remained entirely elsewhere. Files blurred together on my computer screen. Colleagues spoke to me and I responded appropriately, but afterward I couldn't recall a single conversation. The entire world felt muffled and distant, as if I were experiencing everything through thick glass. Thomas called me to his office repeatedly, not with the authoritative summons of a CEO to his subordinate, but with the urgent need of someone desperately seeking answers to questions that had haunted him for decades. We sat together for hours, him asking detailed questions about my earliest memories, and me struggling to retrieve fragments from a childhood I'd tried hard to forget. I told him about the nightmares, the recurring dream that had plagued me since as far back as I could remember. A dark vehicle, loud, angry voices shouting words I couldn't understand. Someone screaming a name that might have been mine, but sounded different, unfamiliar. Then complete darkness, followed by waking up in the orphanage with no memory of how I'd arrived there. Thomas's face had gone deathly pale as I described these visions. His hands clenched into fists on his desk, knuckles white with tension. Christian was taken from a park, he said quietly, his voice hollow with old grief. Mom had turned away for just a moment, literally seconds, to grab his dropped toy. When she looked back, a dark van was pulling away. She screamed his name over and over. Christian. She never stopped screaming it. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as my hand began shaking violently. The similarity was too precise to be coincidental. But coincidences did happen. The human mind was designed to find patterns even where none existed. We couldn't let hope override rational thinking. The DNA samples had been collected that first morning. Quick, professional, clinical, a simple cheek swab that might answer decades of questions. The private laboratory Thomas had selected promised results within 72 hours, which felt simultaneously too fast and agonizingly slow. Waiting was torture. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart would leap into my throat. Every time I saw Thomas's name on my screen, I'd freeze before answering, terrified and desperate in equal measure. What if the test confirmed we were brothers? What if it didn't? I honestly couldn't determine which outcome frightened me more. On the third day, Thomas called me to his office at exactly 2 in the afternoon. His voice on the phone had been carefully neutral, revealing nothing, but I'd heard the tremor beneath his controlled tone. I entered to find him standing by the window, an unopened envelope in his hands. The laboratory's logo was visible on the corner. He turned as I entered, and I saw his eyes were already red-rimmed, though no tears had fallen yet. They just delivered it, he said unnecessarily. I needed you here when I opened it. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. We stood there for a long moment, two people balanced on the knife's edge, between one reality and another completely different one. Thomas's hands shook as he carefully opened the envelope, sliding out the official document. His eyes scanned the text rapidly, and I watched his face transform, shock giving way to overwhelming emotion as tears began streaming down his cheeks unchecked. 99.9% probability of full sibling relationship, he read aloud, his voice breaking completely on the words. Charles, you're genuinely my brother. You're Christian. You came back. My legs simply gave out. I didn't faint or collapse dramatically. I just found myself sitting on the floor, my body having decided independently that standing was no longer possible. Every emotion I possessed seemed to hit simultaneously: shock, disbelief, relief, confusion, grief for all the lost years, joy at finding family, anger at fate, gratitude for this moment. They crashed through me like waves, leaving me unable to breathe properly. Thomas immediately dropped to the floor beside me, pulling me into a fierce embrace. He was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking with sobs he'd probably held back for 20 years. I'm sorry, he kept repeating like a mantra. I'm so incredibly sorry, Christian. We looked everywhere. We never stopped searching. Private investigators, police task forces, media campaigns. We tried everything. I'm sorry we couldn't find you sooner. I found myself crying too, though I couldn't have explained exactly what emotion was driving the tears. Relief? Grief? Some combination of feelings that had no name? You didn't know, I managed to say. Nobody knew. It's not your fault. We sat there on his office floor for a long time, two brothers reunited after 2 decades of separation, letting years of pain and loss flow out through tears. Eventually we composed ourselves enough to visit Marion in the hospital, where she'd been steadily recovering. When we told her the results, her reaction was pure maternal joy mixed with heartbreak. She embraced me so tightly that nurses had to gently intervene, worried about her heart condition. She cried and laughed simultaneously, touching my face repeatedly as if confirming I was real and solid. They took you when you were barely 3 years old, she explained through tears, her voice thick with emotion. We searched for years, hired everyone we could, followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. Police involvement, FBI consultations, international agencies. Nothing ever led anywhere concrete. The case went cold, but we never gave up hope. Never. Hearing the full story, the kidnapping, the frantic search, the years of not knowing made my chest ache with complicated feelings. My entire life I'd felt abandoned, unwanted, convinced my biological family had simply discarded me. Learning that the opposite was true, that I'd been desperately wanted and searched for, fundamentally altered my understanding of my own history. Thomas had been only 8 years old when I disappeared. He shared memories of his little brother, teaching me to tie shoes, reading picture books together, pushing me on swings at that very park where I'd been taken. I blamed myself for years, he admitted quietly. I'd stayed home that day because I was sick. If I'd been there, maybe I could have prevented it somehow. You were a child, I told him firmly. This wasn't your responsibility. Later that evening, in a private moment after Marion had fallen asleep, Thomas hugged me again, differently this time with a protectiveness that felt almost desperate. I won't let anything happen to you again, he promised. You're safe now, you're home. Home. I'd never had one of those, not really. The orphanage had been a building where I slept. My apartment was just a space I occupied. But this family, belonging, people who genuinely cared whether I existed, this was something entirely new. Thank you, I whispered, meaning it more deeply than any words could properly convey. We had decades of lost time to recover, but standing there in that hospital room, reunited family finally together again, it felt like perhaps we could actually begin to heal. The following weeks transformed my existence so completely I sometimes felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life entirely. Legal proceedings moved forward to officially restore my identity as Christian Reed Hale, though everyone agreed I could continue using Charles professionally if I preferred. Marion insisted gently but absolutely that I move into the family mansion, and after initial resistance I'd agreed. The house was enormous, almost overwhelming in its size and luxury. I'd grown up in institutional dormitories and tiny apartments. Now I had an entire suite of rooms larger than some apartments I'd rented. It felt simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. Thomas underwent a complete transformation in how he related to me. The protective older brother instinct activated fully and intensely. He wanted to know where I was constantly, not from controlling impulses but from genuine fear of losing me again. He'd text multiple times daily. He'd insist on driving me places. He wanted to immediately promote me to a senior position with my own office and significant responsibilities. But I'd refused that particular offer firmly. I need to earn advancement through my own merit and capabilities. I'd explained seriously. I don't want people saying I only succeeded because of family connections. Please understand that's important to me. He'd sighed deeply but eventually accepted my decision. You're impossibly stubborn. Exactly like Mom always was, he'd said with a slight smile. Life gradually settled into new patterns. Marion recovered well from her cardiac episode. Her doctors pleased with her progress. Family dinners became routine, warm, filled with conversation and laughter and the comfortable rhythms of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I was learning what family actually meant, experiencing it for the first time in any real sense. One evening, Thomas and I stood together on the mansion's terrace, overlooking the glittering city lights spread below us like fallen stars. A cool breeze carried the scent of the garden, and above us the night sky stretched vast and infinite. I need to tell you something important, Thomas said suddenly, his tone shifting to something more serious. I turned toward him curiously, leaning against the railing. When Mom protected you that day in the conference room, I initially felt jealous, he admitted. I didn't understand why she was treating a random employee with such unusual care. But now it makes perfect sense. Her maternal instinct recognized you before her conscious mind did. Somewhere deep inside she knew. I smiled warmly. Her intuition is remarkable. She's an amazing person. Thomas remained quiet for several seconds, staring upward at the stars, clearly wrestling with internal conflict. Then he took a deep breath and spoke slowly, carefully. But Charles, I also feel something toward you. Something that goes beyond typical brotherly affection. My heartbeat accelerated instantly, pounding hard against my ribs. Was he saying what I thought he might be saying? I understand this is incredibly complicated, Thomas continued, still not looking directly at me, his voice carrying vulnerability I'd rarely heard. We're family. There's office politics to consider. Society has very definite expectations and judgments. All of that exists. But since learning who you really are, since truly getting to know you as a person, I've started seeing you differently. And I recognize this probably violates social norms and expectations. I gathered courage and gently took his hand, interrupting his anxious explanation. We're brothers biologically. That's undeniable truth. But feelings don't always follow logical patterns or traditional expectations. Emotions operate by their own rules entirely. He finally looked directly at me, hope shining in his eyes, mixed with fear and vulnerability and something that looked unmistakably like love. So you're experiencing this too? He asked in barely more than a whisper. I nodded slowly and honestly, my heart racing violently. Yes, I am. Thomas cupped my face with both hands, incredibly gently as if I were something fragile and precious. Then slowly, carefully, giving me every opportunity to pull away or object, he leaned forward and pressed his lips softly against mine. The kiss was gentle, tentative, hesitant, but it overflowed with emotions we'd both been suppressing, longing and love, fear and hope, desperation and relief all tangled together. When we eventually separated, both breathless, our foreheads remained touching. Society might judge this, I said softly and honestly. But does it actually feel wrong to you? No, Thomas responded immediately, and firmly. Losing you again, being separated from you, that would feel wrong. This feels more right than anything ever has. I'll protect you always. I embraced him tightly, and there on that quiet terrace beneath the stars, with city lights humming far below, we silently made a decision together. Whatever society might think, whatever judgments others might pass, we would stay together. The weeks that followed brought their own adjustments. We were careful at the office, maintaining professional boundaries during work hours. But at home we could be ourselves, whatever that meant for us. Marion noticed, of course. Mothers always notice everything. But when Thomas nervously tried to explain our relationship one evening, she'd simply smiled. I already understood, she'd said gently. You two have been given a second chance at family, at connection. How that manifests is between you. I only want both my sons to be happy and safe. Her acceptance meant everything. We'd expected judgment, rejection, conflict. Instead, we received understanding and support. Life wasn't perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes about dark vehicles and screaming voices. Thomas still occasionally woke up panicking, needing to physically confirm I was actually there and not another dream. We both carried trauma that would take years to fully process, but we faced it together now. I had family, real family, who loved me unconditionally. I had Thomas, who looked at me like I was the most important person in his entire world. I had Marion, who'd never stopped loving the son she'd lost and now showered that love on both of us equally. Some evenings the three of us would sit together in the mansion's library, talking about everything and nothing, making up for lost years, creating new memories to replace the painful gaps. Tell me about when I was little, I'd ask sometimes, hungry for any details about a childhood I couldn't remember. And they would share stories how I'd been obsessed with trucks, how I'd refused to eat anything green, how I'd follow Thomas everywhere like a devoted shadow. Each story helped fill empty spaces in my history, gave me pieces of myself I'd thought were lost forever. Thomas would hold my hand during these conversations, squeezing gently whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm. Marion would watch us both with eyes full of joy and residual grief. Grateful we were together again, mourning the decades we'd lost. But we were here now, together, a family reconstructed from broken pieces, perhaps stronger because we understood how precious and fragile connection truly was. Looking at Thomas across the dinner table, or waking beside him in the morning, I finally understood what home actually meant. Not a place, not a building, but people who chose you, who loved you, who would never stop searching if you were lost. We'd found each other against impossible odds. And we would never let go again.